Your local garden center has already moved on. The hanging baskets are gone, the seed racks are half empty, and somebody's stacking pumpkins where the fruit trees used to be. That's not an accident. That's a business decision. Because fall is the single best time of year to plant fruit. And almost nobody's telling you that because there's no money in a customer who plants once in October and doesn't come back to buy replacement plants every June. Here's the thing. Nurseries don't advertise. A fruit tree or bush planted in spring spends its entire first summer just trying to survive the heat while it's still building roots. A fruit tree or bush planted in fall spends the next 6 months doing nothing but building roots. No leaves to feed, no fruit to push, no heat stress. So by the time spring actually arrives, it's already ahead. Cooler air, warmer soil, way less watering. It's not even close. So today, I'm giving you 10 fruits you want in the ground before the first hard frost. Common ones, a few you've probably walked past your whole life without knowing they were edible, and one, right at the very end, that's growing in more American front yards than almost any fruit on this list, disguised the entire time as a decorative shrub. Nobody plants it on purpose. You're about to become one of the few people who does. Let's get into it. Quick myth to clear out of the way first, because it changes how you'll listen to the rest of this video. Most people think planting season means spring, full stop. That's when the garden centers restock. That's when the ads run. That's when everybody's neighbor is out there with a shovel. But planting season was never really a rule of nature. It was a retail calendar. Deciduous fruit plants, the ones that drop their leaves and go dormant, actually prefer to be planted while they're dormant. Because a dormant plant isn't spending energy on leaves or fruit. It's spending every bit of stored energy underground. That's the whole secret behind this entire list. And it's why almost everything below is a fall move, not a spring one. One more thing before we start. If you've tried fruit before and lost it, if you planted something in May, watched it struggle through July, and watched it die by August, that's not because you have a bad phone. That will always be your phone. You won't be so perfect that gets the phone. That's because you were planting on the calendar the industry gave you, not the calendar the plant actually needed. Not your fault. Nobody handed you this information before now. Okay, fruit number one. Strawberries. Everybody thinks of strawberries as a spring project. Little 6-packs at the big box store in April, right next to the tomatoes. But commercial growers have known for decades that bare root strawberry crowns planted in fall, 4 to 6 weeks before your ground freezes, will outproduce spring planted ones by a wide margin the following June. Because they spend the fall building a root system instead of trying to fruit in their first stressed out season. Here's how you do it. Plant the crown right at soil level, not buried, not sitting on top. The crown itself needs to sit exactly where the roots meet the stem. Mulch heavily with straw once the ground starts to cool and walk away until spring. Fall-planted strawberry beds routinely produce their first full harvest 1 full year earlier than spring-planted ones. That's not a small edge. That's an entire growing season you get back. 2. Blueberries. Blueberries are one of the few fruiting shrubs almost everybody gets wrong at the soil level before they ever get it wrong at the planting date level. So let's fix both at once. Fall planting gives blueberry roots months to acclimate to acidic soil before they're asked to push new growth. And acid is the whole game here. Blueberries need a soil pH between 4.5 and 5.5, which is drastically more acidic than almost anything else in a typical yard. A team of researchers at Michigan State University's Blueberry program has spent years documenting exactly this. Root establishment during a dormant fall to spring window correlates directly with first-year fruit yield the following summer. Work sulfur or acidic compost into the bed now. Plant your dormant bush, mulch with pine bark, and you're giving that plant a 5-month head start it would never get from a spring planting. 3. Raspberries and blackberries. Bramble fruits, raspberries, blackberries, the whole family are sold almost exclusively as bare root canes in fall, for a reason growers have known forever. The canes are dormant, cheap, and easy to ship, and they root faster into cool fall soil than they ever would fighting July heat. Plant them in a row with support wire already up, water them in once, and mulch heavy. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, though. Do you know why most backyard bramble patches turn into an impenetrable thicket within 3 years? It's not the plant's fault. It's because nobody prunes the old canes that already fruited. Cut those out every fall, right after harvest, and the whole patch stays productive instead of turning into a briar patch that swallows your fence line. 4. Fig trees. Figs are where people start getting nervous because figs have a reputation as a warm climate only plant, and that reputation is mostly wrong. Fall planting is actually what makes figs viable in far more zones than people assume, because a fig planted dormant in October has an entire winter to establish roots below the frost line before it ever has to face a real cold snap above ground. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes with a new fig, though. They plant it in full exposed wind and then panic when the top dies back the first winter. A fig's root system is tougher than its wood. Plant it against a south-facing wall if you're in a marginal zone. Mulch the base heavily, and even if the top freezes back, the roots will push new growth in spring. Don't rip it out in March just because it looks dead. It almost never is. 5. Apple trees. Bare root apple trees are hands down the best value in the entire fruit growing world, and they only show up one time a year as dormant bare root stock in nurseries in fall and very early winter, sold for a fraction of what a potted, leafed out spring tree costs. Dig a hole twice as wide as the root spread, keep the graft union, that noticeable bump low on the trunk, a couple inches above soil level, and stake it loosely for the first year. Fun fact for you, almost every apple you've ever eaten came from a tree that was grafted, not grown from seed, because apple seeds don't grow true to the parent fruit. Plant a Honeycrisp seed and you'll get a completely different, usually much worse, apple. That's the entire reason grafted bare root trees exist, and it's why fall is when the real deals show up. 6. Pawpaw. This is where the list starts to get strange, and I mean that as a compliment. Pawpaw is North America's largest native edible fruit, a custardy, banana mango tasting fruit that grows wild from the Gulf Coast up into southern Canada, and almost nobody plants it because it doesn't ship or store well, so you'll basically never see it in a grocery store. Fall is the ideal planting window because pawpaw roots are notoriously fragile and hate being disturbed once they're actively growing. Planting dormant in fall gives the taproot months to settle undisturbed. One number worth remembering: you need at least 2 genetically different pawpaw trees to get fruit, because a single tree almost never self-pollinates. Plant one alone and you will get gorgeous maroon flowers and 0 fruit year after year, wondering what went wrong. Plant 2, and by year 4 or 5, you're eating a fruit most of your neighbors have literally never heard of. Quick question, and I actually want you to answer this one in the comments, not just think it. How many fruits have you already eaten in your life that you had no idea grew wild for free somewhere within driving distance of your house? Pawpaw is usually the first one that surprises people. It won't be the last one on this list. Drop your answer below. I read every one of them, and I want to know what surprised you. All right, back to it. This next stretch is where the list stops being things you've maybe heard of and starts being things almost nobody grows on purpose. 7. American persimmon. Not the orange grocery store persimmon. That's the Asian variety. American persimmon is a native tree that once fed entire communities through hard winters, and it's almost disappeared from home landscapes for one simple reason. An unripe one is famously mouth puckeringly astringent, and generations of kids picked one too early, spit it out, and swore off to fruit for life. Wait until it's fully soft, almost falling apart soft, past the point it looks appetizing, and it turns into one of the sweetest fruits native to this continent, tasting close to a spiced date. Plant a dormant bare root sapling in fall. Give it full sun, and be patient. Some varieties take 5 to 7 years to bear. Here's a question worth sitting with. How many fruit trees would still exist in American backyards today if one bad, too early bite hadn't scared off an entire generation of gardeners for good? 8. Goumi berry. If you've never heard of Goumi, you're not alone. This is a nitrogen-fixing shrub from East Asia that produces small, tart, sweet red berries and does something almost no other fruiting plant on this list can do. Into modern day. It actually improves the soil around it while it grows, pulling nitrogen from the air and depositing it in the ground through its roots. A study published through the USDA's plants database catalogs Goumi specifically for its nitrogen-fixing capacity alongside its fruit production, making it one of the only plants on this entire list that's actively feeding everything planted near it. Plant it dormant in fall along a fence line or as a companion to a young apple or pear tree, and in a few years, you'll have berries and better soil in the same footprint. 9. Jujube. Jujube, sometimes called the Chinese date, is a small, drought-tough tree that produces a fruit that starts out crisp like an apple and, if you let it wrinkle on the tree, finishes tasting almost exactly like a soft caramel sweet date. It was brought to the U.S. South more than a century ago, and then largely forgotten outside of a handful of regional growers, despite tolerating drought, poor soil, and neglect better than almost any fruit tree sold commercially today. Fun fact, Jujube is one of the few fruit trees that genuinely thrives on being ignored. Overwatering and overfeeding it is far more likely to kill it than underwatering ever will. Plant it dormant in fall, give it full sun and mediocre soil, and then do the hardest thing a gardener can do with any plant on this list. Nothing. 10. Cornelian cherry. And here's the one I promised you at the start. The fruit growing in front yards all over this country right now, blooming with small yellow flowers every early spring that almost nobody realizes is a fruit tree at all. Cornelian cherry, technically a species of dogwood, is planted constantly as an ornamental for its early spring color, for its tidy shape, and the tart, cherry-like red fruit it produces every summer gets left to rot on the ground or swept up with the leaves, because whoever planted it or whoever's yard it's in now has no idea it's edible. If you already have a dogwood with small yellow blooms in very early spring and unfamiliar red fruit dropping in late summer, go check. You may already own one and not know it. If you're planting new, put it in dormant this fall. It's remarkably cold-hardy and forgiving of poor soil. The mistake almost everyone makes, though, is picking the fruit too early because it looks ripe while it's still hard and sour. Let it go soft and merely falling off the branch, the same way you would with the persimmon, and it turns tart, jammy, and genuinely delicious. That's the fruit hiding in plain sight in more American yards than any other plant on this list, and now you'll never walk past one again without recognizing it. Here's what this list is really about underneath the 10 fruits. Every single item on it is available to you for a fraction of retail price right now, this fall, while most people are packing up their gardening year and waiting for spring, waiting for the industry to tell them it's time again. Planting in fall isn't just a horticultural trick. It's a small, quiet form of independence. Choosing to grow your own food on the calendar the plant actually needs instead of the calendar a garden center built around its own sales quarter. Self-sufficiency doesn't usually look dramatic. It looks like a bare root cane in October soil, or a dormant sapling nobody else in your neighborhood thought to plant this time of year. But 5 years from now, when you're eating a Pawpaw or a Jujube that cost you almost nothing and that your neighbors have never even tasted, you'll know exactly why you did this in the fall instead of waiting. If you're the kind of gardener who'd rather plant once correctly and get years of free fruit out of it than keep replacing dead plants every spring, that's exactly what I make videos for. Every week I dig into what actually works, backed by real research where I can find it, instead of whatever the nearest garden center happens to be restocking. If that's useful to you, subscribe, because the next video builds directly on this one. So, before the ground freezes where you are, pick 2 or 3 off this list, not all 10. That's how fall planting projects die on the vine before they even start, and get them in the ground while the soil's still workable. Tell me in the comments which one you're planting first, and whether you already had a Cornelian cherry in your yard and had no idea. Because somewhere out there tonight, a garden center is closing up early, moving on to pumpkins, and hoping you don't figure out what you just learned in the next 20 minutes.